I used to think there was no such thing as a mistake too big for family to survive. I'd seen people forgive affairs, bankruptcy, even jail time, as long as somebody finally told the truth and meant the apology. I don't believe that anymore. I've learned there's a different category of wound. The kind where the people who caused it weren't strangers. They were the two people who raised you. And the wound doesn't close just because everybody gets older and tired of being angry. I learned that the hard way, through my own son, and through 4 words I said to him in my kitchen, that I will regret until the day I die. You need to move on. My name doesn't matter much to this story. What matters is that I had 2 sons, Grant and Holden, 3 years apart, and for 26 years I told myself I loved them exactly the same. I was lying to myself the whole time, and I didn't understand how badly, until the night Grant stood in my living room, holding a paternity test results envelope in one hand, and his wedding ring in the other, looking at me like he'd never seen my face before. Grant was my oldest, steady, quiet, the kind of kid who mowed the lawn without being asked, and apologized when his brother broke something. Holden was younger, louder. The one teachers called a handful in parent-teacher conferences. The one who always had an excuse ready before the question was even finished. My wife Patrice, and I used to joke that, Grant came out the door already responsible, and Holden came out the door already charming. We thought that was just personality. We didn't see, or didn't want to see, that we were building 2 completely different rulebooks. One for the son who never tested us, and one for the son who tested us constantly. And somehow always got let off easy. Grant married Brianna when he was 28. She was sharp and funny, worked in medical billing, and from the day they met, she made my son laugh in a way I hadn't heard since he was a teenager. They had a daughter, Piper, who by the time all this happened was 5 years old, missing her 2 front teeth and obsessed with horses. She'd never actually ridden. Grant used to send me videos of her galloping around the backyard on a broomstick, neighing at the top of her lungs. I still have those videos. I watch them sometimes, late at night, when the house is too quiet. Holden was 31, and had been drifting between jobs. A stretch in commercial real estate that didn't pan out, a few months selling insurance, a brief and expensive attempt at starting a craft brewery with 2 college buddies that folded within a year. We'd helped him financially more times than I could count. A car repair here, a security deposit there. Once an entire semester's tuition for a certification course he never finished. Every time, Patrice and I told each other the same thing. He just needs a little more time to find his footing. We never said that about Grant, because Grant never needed it. Grant found his footing at 22, and never once asked us for a dime after that. Looking back, I understand now that we punished him for being capable. We just never called it punishment. It started, as far as I can tell, about 8 months before everything blew up, though I didn't know it at the time. Holden had been coming around Grant's place more than usual, ostensibly to help. With a deck, Grant was building in the backyard. Brianna was the one who let it spiral. She told me later in tears, sitting at my kitchen table with her hands shaking around a mug of coffee she never drank, that it began as flirting she told herself was harmless, then became something she couldn't stop even when she wanted to. By the time she found out she was pregnant, she didn't know whose baby it was. She came to me first. Not to Grant, to me. I remember exactly where I was standing. At the stove, making myself a sandwich on a Tuesday afternoon, when she knocked on the kitchen door instead of ringing the front bell, like she always did when she didn't want Grant to hear a car in the driveway. Her eyes were swollen. I thought maybe they'd had a fight about money, or about Piper's school, something small and fixable. Then she said the word pregnant, and I felt something lift in me, the easy joy of a second grandchild on the way. Then she said, I don't know if it's his, and the floor seemed to tilt under me. I asked her who else it could possibly be, already half knowing, already feeling sick before she said the name. Holden, she whispered. I want to tell you I threw her out of my house right then. I want to tell you I called Grant that same hour. I didn't. I sat down across from her, and the very first thing, I thought wasn't about my son's marriage falling apart. It was, how do we keep this from destroying Holden's life too? That sentence still makes me sick to write down. But it's the truth, and I promised myself a long time ago, that if I was ever going to tell this story honestly, I had to tell the ugly parts the same as the rest. I called Holden that night instead of Grant. He came over, denied it for about 4 minutes, then admitted it, then cried, then said it had only happened a couple times. Then later admitted it had been going on for months. Every new detail made it worse, and every time, I kept looking for the angle that made it survivable for him, not for Grant. I told myself, I was trying to protect Piper from a sudden explosion. I told myself Grant could handle it. Because Grant could always handle things. I told myself 100 small lies that all amounted to the same ugly fact. I was choosing Holden, the way I had always quietly chosen Holden, and calling it keeping the peace. We pushed Brianna to get a quiet paternity test, before saying anything to Grant. We told Holden to stay away from the house. We thought we were containing a fire. We were just letting it build under the floorboards. Grant found out 3 days before his 6th wedding anniversary. Brianna finally broke and told him herself, after the test came back, after months of us all knowing and him not. He showed up at our house that night, looking like a man who'd been gutted, and was still standing somehow out of pure stubbornness. His face was gray. His hands wouldn't stop shaking. He set the test results down on our coffee table, like it was something contaminated, and he looked at me and he asked, "Did you know?" I should have said no, even though it would have been a lie, just to buy myself one more second of being his father instead of his betrayer. Instead, I hesitated. A single second. That was enough. His whole face changed before I even opened my mouth. "You knew," he said. Not a question anymore. Patrice looked at the floor. I said something about needing to sit down and talk about it the right way. Grant laughed, not a real laugh, something broken and short, and asked how long. Neither of us answered right away. And when I finally said a few weeks, that was already a lie. It had been closer to 2 months. He looked at his mother. Patrice, God help her, said, "Grant, sweetheart, there's a baby involved now. Maybe 2, depending. We have to think about what's best going forward." "What's best going forward?" Grant repeated, like the words tasted like metal. I stepped in then, because I always stepped in when things got too emotional, and what I said next is the sentence I would give anything to take back. "Nobody's defending what happened, son. But for Piper's sake, for everybody's sake, at some point you're going to need to find a way to move on." Move on. I can still hear myself saying it. Reasonable and calm, like I was suggesting he switch insurance providers. Grant's mouth opened slightly, like the words had physically struck him. He looked at his mother, maybe hoping she'd correct me. She didn't. Neither of us did. "No," he said quietly. "He stopped being my brother the second he touched my wife." He looked at both of us. "And you stopped being my parents the moment you helped them hide it." Then he walked out of our house, and for 3 days, I genuinely believed he'd come back once he cooled down. That's the particular arrogance of parents, who think they raised somebody loyal enough to forgive anything. I thought blood was a leash. I learned it isn't. On the 4th day, Brianna called me crying, saying Grant had packed everything. Not just his own things, but Piper's school records, her medical files, the whole filing cabinet of a child's existence, and that he'd already retained a lawyer. Because Piper was his biological daughter. Because Brianna had been bringing Holden into the house, while Piper slept upstairs. And because Grant had texts and a calendar of dates that didn't leave much room for interpretation, the temporary custody order went almost entirely his way. Brianna got supervised visitation. Holden was barred from any contact with Piper. And Grant didn't just move out of that house. He moved out of our lives. The last time I saw my granddaughter for what turned out to be years, she was standing next to Grant's pickup truck. In the driveway, wearing a backpack shaped like a unicorn. Holding a stuffed horse under one arm. I came down the driveway calling her name, and she turned toward me, the way kids do automatically when they hear someone they trust. Then Grant stepped between us, not violently, just enough to draw a line that couldn't be misunderstood. "Don't," he said. "Grant, please, let me just say goodbye to her." He shook his head. "She's confused enough as it is. I'm her grandfather." His jaw tightened. "And I was your son." Piper peeked around his leg, asking him if Grandpa was mad. He crouched down and told her gently that nobody was mad, that it was just grown-up stuff, and to get in the truck. She trusted him completely and did exactly what he said. After the door shut, I reached for his sleeve and he stepped back before I could touch him. "Please don't take her from us," I said. "You already took plenty from me," he answered. Then he got in the truck and drove away, and that was the last time I stood that close to either of them for 8 years. For the first month we told ourselves it was temporary, that he was punishing us and would tire of it. Holden insisted Grant was being dramatic. Brianna, when she still talked to us, said Grant was using Piper as a weapon. I repeated all of it to myself like scripture. Because the actual truth, that Grant was protecting his daughter from the exact family pattern that had hurt him his whole life, was too heavy to hold. We tried everything that desperate, guilty people try. Calls, texts, messages relayed through cousins, even showing up at the engineering firm where he used to work, only to find out he'd quit. We drove to his house and found it sold, the yard already different. A tricycle that wasn't Piper's parked in the driveway. The school told us, carefully, that Piper was no longer enrolled. His number was disconnected. His social media accounts simply vanished. Like he'd erased every digital trace of having existed near us. At one point Holden, in a fit of self-pity, said, "Fine, let him have his little tantrum." It wasn't a tantrum. It was a door closing, and we just hadn't accepted yet that it was permanent. Months passed. Brianna had the baby, a boy she named Eli. Holden cried holding him for the first time, and so did I. But my tears were complicated in a way I didn't examine closely enough back then. Eli was innocent. Completely, entirely innocent. Born into a wreckage that wasn't his fault at all. But every time I held him, some part of my mind drifted to Piper. Wondering if she still carried that unicorn backpack. Wondering if Grant read to her at night. Wondering if she ever asked about us. Then I'd get irritated at Grant for making me wonder. Which is maybe the ugliest thing grief does to a guilty person. It turns the loss into something that happened to you instead of something you caused. A year passed, then two. Holden and Brianna tried to make something work between them. The way people sometimes try to build a house out of the same wood that already burned once. It didn't go well. They fought constantly. She resented him for wrecking her marriage. He resented her for the daily reminder of what he'd done. Eli grew into a quiet, watchful little boy who flinched at raised voices. Patrice and I helped where we could. Groceries, babysitting, rent some months. And told ourselves that propping Holden up was the only useful thing left for us to do. Deep down I knew it was the same old pattern, wearing a different outfit. Cleaning up after Holden, and calling it love. By the third year, Brianna left him and moved in with her sister, taking Eli with her. Holden fell apart in slow motion. Drinking too much. Losing a job at a logistics company. Calling us at 1 a.m. to cry about how everyone in his life eventually abandoned him. Patrice got quieter. I got older faster than I expected to. And Grant stayed gone. The only proof we had that our oldest son was even alive came once a year, around Piper's birthday. An envelope with no return address. Containing a single printed photo, never a note. The first year, she was missing a tooth, grinning beside what looked like a lake. The next year, she was on a bike with training wheels still attached. Wearing a helmet too big for her head. The year after that, she stood in front of a chalkboard. Holding some kind of certificate. By the fourth photo, she was noticeably taller, hair in 2 braids. Standing next to Grant in front of a wall of pine trees. Grant looked different in that one. Leaner. Calmer. Like a man who'd put down something heavy. That photo wrecked me more than the others. Not because he looked sad, but because he didn't. I'd spent years assuming he would eventually need us again. He didn't look like a man who needed anything from us. He looked like a man who'd survived us. I sat at the kitchen table holding it until my hands went numb, and Patrice came in, saw my face, and didn't ask. She already knew. After a long silence she said, "We lost him." And it was the first completely honest sentence either of us had managed to say out loud in years. The 5th year, I had a minor stroke. Not catastrophic, but frightening enough. One side of my face drooped for a few days. My speech slurred when I got tired. And I spent 4 nights in the hospital feeling like an old man for the first time in my life. That was when I started asking for Grant out loud. Instead of just thinking about him in the dark. I'd sit in my recliner at night, scrolling through old photos on my phone. Grant at 16 holding a baseball trophy. Grant at 22 in a cap and gown. Grant on his wedding day, smiling next to Brianna, with no idea what was waiting down the road for both of them. One night Patrice found me crying over a picture of Grant and Holden as boys, sitting on the porch steps, popsicles melting down their wrists. Grant was maybe 9 in that photo. Holden was 5. I looked at my wife and said the truest sentence of my entire life. I taught him that Holden mattered more. She sat beside me and didn't argue, because by then there wasn't any energy left in either of us for denial. A week later I asked Patrice to try and find him. We'd tried before. Searched online, asked around, even hired a private investigator for a few months, who came back with nothing. Because Grant hadn't disappeared like someone running scared. He'd disappeared like someone closing a door carefully and locking it behind him. But fear is a strange motivator, and my heart scared me into trying one more time. This time, we found something. Not Grant directly. Piper. Her middle school had posted photos from a regional spelling bee, and there she was, name printed clean under the photo, Piper Holt. Holt had been my mother's maiden name. Which Grant must have taken on purpose, something private and pointed that only made sense once I understood the rest. The school was in a small town outside Asheville, North Carolina. I should have stopped there. I should have respected the silence he'd built so carefully. But guilt, once it's hungry enough, convinces you that your own pain entitles you to disturb someone else's peace. I found the town, then a youth soccer league website, then a coach's roster, and there he was, Grant Holt, assistant coach. In a photo kneeling among a row of kids in matching jerseys, one arm around Piper's shoulders. He was smiling, and it wasn't the careful, polite smile he used to wear at our holiday dinners while Holden talked over everyone at the table. It was real. My son was alive. My son was happy. And my very first feeling, before any relief, was a flash of jealousy so ugly it scared me. How dare he be happy without us? Then, almost immediately, a second thought arrived right behind it. How dare we expect anything else? I printed the photo and showed Patrice. She cried and said, "I need to see him before I die." I told her she wasn't dying. But fear makes people dramatic and guilt makes them desperate, and we argued for 2 days about whether to reach out at all. In the end, I wrote a letter. It took me 6 tries. The first version explained too much. The second apologized too little. The third mentioned Piper by name and I crossed it out. Because asking for access to her would have turned an apology into another request. The final version said only what was true. Grant, we were wrong. Not confused, not doing our best under difficult circumstances. Wrong. We protected Holden when we should have protected you. We asked you to forgive something unforgivable. Because forgiving him made our lives easier than standing beside you. We used your daughter's name to pressure you into staying quiet, when we should have cared about what she was being exposed to.
I'm sorry.
Your mother is sorry too. We don't deserve a relationship with you. And we don't deserve one with Piper. But if you're ever willing to talk to us, even once, we'll listen without defending ourselves. Dad. I mailed it to the address on the soccer club's website because I had no other way to reach him. Then I waited. A month passed with nothing. Then too, Patrice's hope curdled into bitterness. She started saying he wanted us to suffer on purpose. I didn't agree. I told her I thought he wanted peace, not revenge, and she looked at me sharply but didn't push back. 3 months after I sent it, an envelope arrived with no return address. My hands shook so badly I had to sit down at the table before opening it. Inside was a single page in Grant's handwriting. Dad, I got your letter. I believe you're sorry. I also think you still don't fully understand what you're sorry for. You lost a son and a granddaughter. I lost my wife, my brother, my parents, my home, my name, and the version of my life I thought was real. You had months to tell me the truth and you chose silence instead. Then, when I was standing in front of you completely broken, you asked me to make it easier for everyone else to keep living comfortably. That's why I left. Not for revenge. Because I finally understood that if I stayed, Piper would learn the same lesson I learned as a kid. That love means absorbing harm, quietly, so the family doesn't have to feel uncomfortable. I won't teach her that. Don't come here, don't contact her schools. Don't go through anyone else to reach us. If I ever decide to talk to you, it'll be my decision, not yours. Grant. I read it twice, folded it carefully and set it on the kitchen table. Patrice read it after me, and when she finished, her face twisted into anger instead of grief. So that's it? He gets to lecture us like we're criminals? I looked at her, and for the first time in our marriage, I saw a pattern I'd spent years refusing to name out loud. The way guilt curdles into anger, because anger is so much easier to carry. He's right, I said. He took our granddaughter, she snapped. No, I said, my voice shaking. We gave him every reason to. That was the beginning of the end of her denial, though it didn't happen all at once. She sulked for days. But the letter stayed on that table, and she kept rereading it. At breakfast, late at night when she thought I was asleep. And slowly something in her cracked open. One evening she asked if I remembered when Grant was 14 and had saved for months to buy a used electric guitar. And Holden stole the money out of his sock drawer and spent it at the mall with friends. We'd made Holden apologize and told Grant not to be so dramatic about it because his brother felt bad. She said quietly, he never did buy that guitar. I remembered everything after that, all at once, like a wall finally giving way. Grant's birthday dinner we'd canceled because Holden got suspended that same week. Grant handing Holden his car because Holden needed a fresh start. Holden trashing Grant's first apartment during a party Grant never agreed to. We didn't create Holden's affair with Brianna. But we built the world that taught him. There'd always be someone. There'd always be Grant, absorbing the consequences so he never had to. 6 months after Grant's letter, Holden showed up at our house asking for money. He looked rough, thin, unshaven, smelling like cigarettes and something sweeter underneath. He said Brianna was threatening to move out of state with Eli, that he needed a lawyer, that he'd changed, that nobody believed in him anymore. There was a time I'd have written the check before he finished the sentence. This time I said no. He stared at me like I'd spoken a foreign language. What? We're not giving you any more money, Holden. His face hardened. Grant got to you, didn't he? Patrice stood up from her chair, slower than she used to, but steadier than I expected. Don't blame your brother. My brother? Holden looked sharp and bitter. He abandoned all of us. No, she said. He escaped. The room went dead quiet. Holden looked like he'd been slapped. Then his anger came pouring out. Brianna had seduced him. Everyone treated him like the villain. Eli was his son and deserved his support. Family was supposed to help family no matter what. I sat there and watched him shout in the same living room, where Grant had once stood silently holding his marriage in ruins, and finally I understood the difference between my 2 sons. Grant had asked for the truth. Holden demanded to be rescued. When Holden left that night, he slammed the door hard enough that a framed family photo fell off the hallway wall. It was an old portrait, all 4 of us smiling for the camera. The glass cracked diagonally, right across Grant's face. I picked it up to throw it away, then stopped myself, slid the photo out of the broken frame, and cut Grant's image out carefully with kitchen scissors. I put it in a small album with the birthday photos he'd been sending of Piper. It wasn't enough. Nothing was going to be enough. But it was the first time I chose to keep Grant without keeping the version of our family that had hurt him. Another year passed. My health kept declining in slow increments. Good weeks, bad weeks. On the bad ones I'd sit by the window and ask Patrice if Grant had written again. He hadn't. Then, one cold morning in late autumn, I collapsed in the bathroom. At the hospital, a cardiologist told us my heart was weaker than anyone had realized. I listened quietly, then turned to Patrice and asked her to write to him again. He told us not to, she said. I know. We shouldn't ask him to come. I just need him to know I'm sorry before I can't say it myself. So I dictated a letter from that hospital bed, stopping every few sentences to catch my breath. Grant, I failed you. I called it discipline when I was hard on you and patience when I excused your brother. But the truth is I expected you to be strong because it was convenient for me to expect that. When Holden hurt you, I protected myself from the discomfort of holding him accountable. When he destroyed your marriage, I did it again. I'm ashamed of the father I was. You owe me nothing, not a visit, not forgiveness, not even a reply. But I need you to know that you leaving forced me to finally see what kind of man I'd been. I'm sorry, son. Dad. We mailed it, and 3 weeks later Grant answered. His letter was short. Dad, I read your letter. Thank you for saying it without asking me for anything back. I hope you get better, Grant. Patrice held that letter against her chest and cried like a child. It wasn't forgiveness. But for a long stretch of time, it was enough to hold on to. Then came the day everything shifted again. It was Piper's 11th birthday. For 6 years straight, a photo had arrived without fail. That year nothing came. I told myself the mail was slow. A week passed, then 10 days, and on the 11th day a thicker envelope finally showed up. Inside was a photo of Piper grinning beside a birthday cake, shaped like a stack of books. Grant standing behind her, and beside him a woman we'd never seen before. Kind eyes, one hand resting gently on Piper's shoulder. On the back, in Grant's handwriting, was a single sentence. Piper asked if she could send this one. I read those 4 words until they blurred from tears. Piper had asked. Our granddaughter knew we existed. She knew enough to ask. A month later we found a small wedding announcement online for a town we'd never heard of. Grant Holt and a woman named Vivian Cross, a high school art teacher. The ceremony had been small, held in someone's garden. Piper was listed as junior bridesmaid. I read it 3 times, feeling joy and grief, tangled together so tightly, I couldn't separate them. My son had built a whole life without us in it, and somehow that night, my grief finally stopped feeling like anger and started feeling like acceptance. 2 years after that, I died. Not really. I'm telling this story, obviously I'm still here. But my heart finally gave out the way doctors had been warning us it would. I went to sleep one night in early spring and simply didn't wake up. On my nightstand were 3 things. My reading glasses, Grant's last letter, and the photo from Piper's 11th birthday. I'm sorry, that's not how this happened, and I owe you the truth instead of being dramatic about it for effect. Patrice told me this part of the story later, because I genuinely wasn't there for it. It was Patrice who survived me telling it. And I'm narrating it now the way she described it to me before I passed. Weaving her account into mine, because by then we'd finally become honest enough with each other to share everything, including the things that hurt the most. She called Holden first. He cried, but even grieving he made it chaotic. Asking about the will, asking if Brianna had been notified, asking whether Eli would get anything. Then she sat alone for nearly an hour, before calling the only number she had for Grant. The one he'd used once, to confirm he'd received my hospital letter. She didn't expect him to pick up, he did. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Then she said, Grant, it's Mom. Your father passed away this morning. There was a long silence and then his voice came back, careful and quiet. I'm sorry. 2 words. Polite, distant, more than she felt she deserved. She told him she wasn't asking him to come. Another silence, then he said thank you. She forced herself to keep going. He loved you. He knew he failed you, and he knew it before he died. Grant's voice dropped lower. I'm glad he knew. The funeral was small. Holden arrived late, bringing Eli, who was 8 by then, serious and watchful in a way that made Patrice's chest ache. Brianna didn't come. During the service, Holden cried loudly, the way he'd always cried, big and visible, drawing comfort toward himself the way he always had. Patrice sat in the front row with dry eyes, holding the folded memorial program, thinking about the son who wasn't there. Then, just as the service ended, she saw him. Grant, standing near the back of the chapel, older, broader, through the shoulders, a little gray starting at his temples. Beside him stood Piper, 13 now, in a black dress, holding his hand. Vivian stood on his other side. For one suspended moment, the whole broken family existed in the same room again. Holden saw him too, and his face went pale. He moved first, walking toward Grant with his arms already half raised, saying his name like they were teenagers again. Grant's body went still. Piper's grip tightened on his hand. Vivian stepped slightly closer to them both. Please, Holden said, voice cracking. I'm sorry. I was stupid. I ruined everything. I know that. But Dad's gone now. We can't keep doing this. Grant looked at him for a long moment. We're not doing anything, Holden. I'm living my life. I lost my brother. Holden said you threw him away. Grant answered, his voice never rising. People nearby pretended not to be listening. Holden wiped his face and asked if he could at least meet Piper. Grant's expression hardened instantly. No. She's your niece, but she's not responsible for making you feel forgiven. Holden broke down completely, sobbing into his hands, and for the first time in years, Patrice didn't go to comfort him. She stayed seated. Grant walked past his brother and came toward his mother. She stood on shaking legs. For the first time in 8 years, her son stood in front of her. She wanted to hug him so badly it hurt physically. But she remembered the driveway, remembered him stepping back from her hand, so she didn't reach for him this time. She only said, "Thank you for coming." Piper wanted to say goodbye to her grandfather, he said. Patrice looked at her granddaughter, who studied her with cautious, careful eyes. Not hateful, just guarded. "Hello, Piper?" she said, and Piper looked first at her father, who gave a small nod, before saying simply hi. Patrice told me she wanted to say 100 things in that moment. "I missed you, I love you, do you remember me?" But she'd learned, finally, that her feelings didn't entitle her to put weight on a 13-year-old. So instead she said, "Your grandfather kept every photo your dad ever sent of you." Piper looked surprised. "He did?" Patrice nodded. "He loved watching you grow up, even from far away." Something in Piper's eyes softened, just slightly. After the burial, Grant found Patrice alone, while Piper and Vivian waited by the car. "You handled that better than I expected," he told her. She almost laughed through her tears, and said she'd had 8 years to learn exactly one lesson. When he asked what it was, she said, "That love without respect just turns into selfishness." He looked away for a moment, and then asked quietly whether Piper hated them. "No," he said, "but she doesn't know you." Patrice told me those words hurt worse than hatred would have. Because hatred at least means there's still a connection. Not knowing someone means the connection already died a while ago. Before he left, Grant reached into his coat pocket and handed her an envelope. "Piper wrote this before we came. She wasn't sure she wanted to give it to you." Patrice's hands shook as she took it. He told her to read it later, not right then, and then he turned to walk back to his family. Patrice called his name once, panicked, not the old grabbing kind of panic but a quieter kind. The fear that this might be all she'd ever get. He stopped and turned slightly. She told him she was proud of him, that she should have said it when he was a boy, when he became a husband, when he became a father, instead of always assuming he'd be fine without hearing it. He didn't turn around fully, but he didn't walk away either, so she finished. "You weren't fine, and you still became good." He bowed his head for a second and then said, "Goodbye, Mom," and walked back to his wife and daughter. This time, she didn't chase the truck down the driveway, she let them go. That night, alone, she opened Piper's letter. "Dear Grandma. Dad said I could decide if I wanted to write to you. I don't remember much from when I was little. I remember your kitchen had a clock shaped like a sunflower. I remember Grandpa let me have extra dessert even when Dad said one was enough. I remember being confused when we left, and nobody explained it to me for a long time. Dad never said anything mean about you. He just said adults make mistakes. And some mistakes change a family forever. I don't know if I want to visit. I don't know if Dad wants that either. But I wanted you to know I'm okay. Dad is a good dad. Vivian is nice. I like horses, mystery books, and lemon bars. I hope Grandpa knew I remembered him. Piper." Patrice told me. She pressed that letter to her chest and cried until the sun came up. Not because it promised any kind of future. Because it didn't, but because her granddaughter, the child we'd lost through our own choices, had handed her a piece of plain truth without any cruelty attached to it. "I'm okay. Dad is a good dad." That was the mercy, not forgiveness. Mercy. In the months after, Patrice and Grant exchanged a handful of careful short emails. He told her Piper was doing well in school. She told him she'd started seeing a therapist. He said he was glad. She mentioned once that Holden had asked about him. And Grant never responded to that part of the message. She learned not to bring it up again. One afternoon, her therapist asked what she actually wanted from Grant. She started to say a relationship. Then stopped herself, because even that answer was still centered on her own need. So she said the truer thing instead. "I want him to never regret leaving." That became something close to a prayer for her. Not that Grant would come back. Not that Piper would ever call her grandma with warmth in her voice. Just that the damage would stop with the people who caused it, and not travel one more generation further. Holden didn't understand any of that for a long time. He kept spiraling, blaming Grant for tearing the family apart, blaming Brianna for tempting him, blaming his parents for not bailing him out enough, blaming bad luck, blaming anyone but himself. Then one evening Eli asked him a question that he later told Patrice had broken something open in him. Eli had asked, "Did Uncle Grant leave because of me?" Holden said the question gutted him, because he realized his own son was quietly carrying shame for a story he hadn't asked to be born into. That was when Holden finally went to counseling. Not because anyone forced him. Not because Grant forgave him. But because watching his son absorb the poison was worse than any consequence he'd faced himself. It took years, and it wasn't a clean transformation. Real change rarely is. He still struggled. Still had selfish instincts that surfed under stress. Still wanted forgiveness handed to him before he'd actually earned accountability. But he started paying child support on time without being chased for it. He stopped drinking. He apologized to Brianna without expecting anything back from her, and one day he asked Patrice for Grant's address. She said no. He got angry, then breathed through it, and finally said, "Okay." She told me that was the first time in his entire life she'd watched him accept a boundary without trying to punish someone for setting it. Maybe there was hope for him yet, but hope for Holden never meant access to Grant. That distinction took her far too long to learn, and she made sure to hold it firmly once she finally understood it. 3 years after I died, Piper turned 16. A new photo arrived, with a short note from Grant. She got her learner's permit. "Pray for me." Patrice laughed and cried at the same time looking at it. Piper standing proudly beside an old gray sedan. Grant beside her pretending to look terrified. Vivian laughing somewhere in the background. On the back, in Piper's handwriting, "Still love lemon bars." Patrice put that photo on the mantle, not as some kind of trophy, just as a quiet gift to herself. Later that same year, Grant called her on the phone, completely unannounced. She was washing dishes when it rang, and when his name lit up the screen, she nearly dropped the plate she was holding. "Hi, Mom?" That word again, after everything. She gripped the edge of the counter and managed a quiet "Hi, Grant." He cleared his throat and said Piper a soccer tournament meant coming up a few hours from where Patrice lived. She asked if Patrice might want to come watch one game. Patrice stayed silent for a second, afraid that speaking too soon would break whatever fragile thing was happening. "There are conditions," he said. "Anything. You come alone. You don't bring Holden. You don't tell Holden. You don't introduce yourself to her friends as her grandmother unless she does it first. If I say the visit's over, it's over." "Yes," Patrice said immediately. "I mean it, I know. Yes. And Mom, this isn't a reunion. It's one game. One game is more than I deserve." She told him, and there was a pause on the line before he said quietly, "That's exactly why I'm considering it." The tournament was held on a cold, windy Saturday. Patrice arrived early and sat on the far end of the bleachers, hands folded tightly in her lap, trying not to look like she was watching too closely. When Piper ran onto the field, Patrice recognized her instantly, not from the photos, but from the way she moved, focused and steady, exactly like Grant always had been as a boy. Grant spotted her in the stands before Piper did, and gave one small nod across the field. Vivian, beside him, smiled gently in her direction. Patrice didn't shout too loudly during the game. She didn't cry where anyone could see. She didn't try to insert herself into the moment that belonged to this family she'd hurt so badly. She simply watched her granddaughter play soccer under a gray autumn sky, and felt something she could only describe later as the strange, humbling holiness of being allowed to witness a moment she had no real right to. After the final whistle, Piper jogged over with Grant a few steps behind her, cheeks flushed from running. "Hi," she said. "Hi," Patrice answered. "You played beautifully." Piper smiled, just a little. "Thanks." An awkward silence followed, and Patrice remembered the small container she'd brought, and pulled it out of her bag, glancing at Grant first. "Only if it's okay," she said quickly. "Lemon bars. I just remembered." For a second nobody moved. Then Piper smiled. A real smile this time, and said, "I still like lemon bars," and reached for the container. They sat at a picnic table near the field for maybe 20 minutes, talking about school, soccer, a mystery novel Piper was reading. Not about the past. Not about Holden. Not about forgiveness or what came next. At the end Piper hugged her, quick, careful but real. Patrice didn't hold on too long. She let Piper pull away first. Grant noticed, and on the way back to the car, he stopped beside her and said, "You did well today." It was such a small sentence, but, coming from him, after everything, it felt like grace. Years have passed since that game. Things between them never became what Patrice once imagined a family was supposed to look like. Grant doesn't call every week. Piper doesn't spend holidays at Patrice's table. Vivian is kind but careful. Protective in a way Patrice fully understands and doesn't resent. Holden has never once been allowed near Grant's family, and that boundary may be permanent. Patrice has made her peace with that. People still hear pieces of this story sometimes and say family should always forgive, no matter what. Patrice used to believe that too. She doesn't anymore. She came to understand that forgiveness isn't a command you hand down to the person who was wounded, so the guilty party can finally sleep at night. Forgiveness, if it ever comes, belongs entirely to the person who was hurt. On their own timeline, by their own choice. She still regrets what we did every single day. The silence, the excuses, the way she looked at Grant's pain, and immediately started calculating how to protect Holden from the consequences instead. She regrets saying move on, when what Grant actually needed that night was one sentence. "I am on your side." We never gave him that, so eventually he chose a side for himself. He chose his daughter. He chose his own peace. He chose a life where betrayal didn't get dressed up as family obligation, and handed back to him as something he was required to swallow. Now, when Patrice looks at the most recent photo on her mantle, Grant standing beside Piper at her high school graduation, Vivian there too, proud and smiling. Piper holding her diploma in one hand and, somehow, a lemon bar in the other. Because that became their small private tradition. She sees everything that was lost. And everything that, against the odds, still managed to survive. On the back of that photo Piper had written, "Thank you for coming, Grandma, Grandma." That words still makes Patrice cry every time she reads it. Not because it means everything is fixed, because it isn't. Some chairs stay empty. Some apologies arrive too late to rebuild what they're meant to repair. I never got the reunion I wanted before I died. Grant never got the parents he deserved when he needed them most. Piper never got the version of childhood where both sides of her family could sit in the same room without history hanging over the table. And Patrice never got back the years she lost. But she got the truth, in the end. And the truth, as painful as it was, gave her one last chance to stop doing harm. So if you're a parent listening to this, and one of your children has hurt another, don't ask the one who was wounded to be the one who holds the family together. Don't call their boundaries cruelty. Don't mistake their silence for disrespect. Don't tell them to move on just because their pain is inconvenient for everyone else's comfort. Because, one day they might do exactly what Grant did. They might move on, without you. And if they take their child, their peace, their name, and their whole future with them, you may spend the rest of your life staring at old photographs, wondering why you ever believed blood was stronger than betrayal. We told our son to move on after his brother got his wife pregnant. So he did. He moved on from his wife. He moved on from his brother. And eventually, he moved on from us too.